I'm Monisha Rajesh. I'm from London and I'm the author of Around India in 80 Trains, which came out in 2012 now. And my most recent book is Around the World in 80 Trains, which came out at the beginning of last year. I'm also a journalist and I write for a number of different newspapers, including New York Times, Guardian, The Times, also Condé Nast Traveller, Vanity Fair, anyone who'll have me really. And I'm in the middle of plotting my third book, but obviously as that's going to involve quite a lot of travel. I have to wait and see what's going to happen over the next few months before I can make any firm plans about that. With regards to my background, I was born in Norfolk and lived there for about 3 years, I think it was, till my family moved north. And I spent most of my time growing up around Yorkshire. And then I actually moved to India when I was about 9 for a year or two. That didn't really go to plan for my parents, so we came sort of hot-footing it back to Sheffield and then stayed here. And my parents have been in Birmingham ever since, so more than 20 years. And after I did a French degree at Leeds, I then moved down to London and did a postgraduate journalism degree before starting off in various papers and magazines and then branching out into travel. So that's me in a nutshell.
Where did your love of travel come from? Was that something that came from your childhood?
Yeah, do you know, I think a few people have asked me this recently, and interestingly, they said most travel writers, or book writers anyway, from the last sort of 40, 50 years, got their love of travel from not being able to travel and from growing up in these really tiny, little towns way up north where they just had to devour books to have a sense of travel and decided to set off on these magnificent journeys to discover things for themselves. But I think I was the opposite. I had so much travel when I was little that being in any place for too long would tire me, and I get really I get itchy feet and always feel like I needed to move on and do something new. And I think because we moved around so much when I was little, we didn't live in any city for more than 2 or 3 years at a time. I got so used to moving on all the time and meeting new people and starting afresh and finding new ways to live, I guess. And so I think travel was always just a part of me. And also my parents were great in hindsight. When we were really, really small, as young as 3 months, actually, they would take us everywhere. And I think one of my first train journeys was in Switzerland when they took us from Bern to Bonn and then Bonn to Berlin. And I remember hearing a horror story actually from my mum about how, because of a few language issues, they hopped on a train thinking it was going to Bonn, found out it was going to Bern as it was pulling out, and had to literally take me with my pram across the tracks with people blowing whistles and shouting in horror what they were doing. But that's probably where my love of train travel came from, because I always remember traveling by train, and it was just something that always sat in the back of my mind. So when I decided to set off and do my travels around India, railways were the first thing that came to my mind as a really great, easy way to see the country, and also a really fun one.
How did that idea come about? Had that always been a dream of yours since you spent those couple of years in India when you were 9 years old?
I think having lived in India for that couple of years played quite a large role in my decision to go back to India and travel for that 5-month period. But it came about because I was working at Time magazine, and I happened to read an article which was about how India's domestic airlines could now connect 80 cities. And I pulled up the piece and I started reading. And I was fascinated by this because when I'd lived there were barely 2 or 3 airlines, I think, and they certainly didn't connect anywhere near half as much as that. And when I pulled up a map to see where all these cities were, I was just completely gobsmacked because I didn't recognize most of these places. And even though I spent a couple of years there, you do that thing where you live somewhere, you never really see what there is until you're just about to leave. And you never really venture beyond what's your immediate vicinity, I guess. And there were all these cities there that I've read so much about, and I've seen so many TV programs about, and friends had visited, and people had spent gap years there. And I just thought, I really want to see the Taj Mahal in the morning, see it at moonlight. I want to go and visit Rajasthan's deserts. I want to, go to Kerala's backwaters, and I want to go hiking in the foothills of the Himalayas. And I just thought, I'd really love to go and do this, but there's no way I'm going to do it by 80 flights. It seemed a horrendous idea of massive carbon footprint and very costly. And at that point, when I looked at the map, I could see this really, really tiny, almost like embroidery all over the country. And when I looked at the key, I saw that it was the Indian Railways network. And I started to trace it, and it was absolutely incredible how far it could reach, way up into the mountains. It literally hemmed in the coast. It went right out into the furthest fingers of the country's reach. And I quickly looked at, the prices of train tickets, and I thought I could do 80 trains for not that much money. And I shelved the idea. I didn't think about it again for a couple of months, but it just kept coming back to me. And eventually, I decided to just go for broke and go and do it. So I wanted to go and travel around India and just, I guess, reassess my relationship with the country, because we hadn't had a brilliant time as a family there. And I think we had just, well, not I say we, my parents had just got so used to the UK, and they lived here much longer than they had in India, and things had changed so much that they realized that England was home and India just wasn't somewhere that they could settle with their family. And I really struggled at school, and so we left with a bit of a bitter taste in our mouth. And it had been 20 years since we left, and I decided that it was just the right time to go back and, give it another go and see how I felt about it. And literally in a heartbeat, I thought I can do around in 80 trains, with the idea of doing a book about how the country had, revealed itself to me over those 4 months. And so I bought a rail pass and a flight, and I set off.
How old were you, and what was it like sort of heading over on this adventure of a lifetime, I suppose?
I was 28, and I always remember that, because when you have to fill in the forms to get your train tickets at the station, you just have to fill in two things: your sex and your age. And I just remember F28, having to write that down over and over and over again. And it was, oh gosh, so that was, it was 10 years now. It's almost 11 years since I set off to do the journey. But it was quite frightening in one way, because I hadn't really been back to India much. I certainly hadn't been on a train for 20 years. And I thought, gosh, I wonder if they're still really mucky and delayed and rusty and, cold at night. And they were all those things, but they were amazing. They were so much fun. But I just set off with a really open mind, and I thought, if I'm going to go and do this, I have to just surrender myself to everything. And I had got a friend of a friend who came with me for some bits of the journey, who's a photographer. So I felt a little bit safer having a male photographer at my side. And, that didn't always work out for the best. We had our fallings out, as anyone who travels with friends will recognize. But it meant that we were able to just travel to so many different bits of the country that I might not have done on my own, or felt particularly safe doing on my own. But it was a really fantastic 4.5 months, and I absolutely, I really feel right now how freewheeling I was at the time, given that we can't travel at this moment. And I'm so grateful for the fact that I went off and did this with, I guess none of us had the foresight that there would once come a day where we wouldn't be able to do this so easily.
Yeah. How was it culturally? So you're Indian, but you've been brought up in the UK, and you've then spent a couple of years over in India. Then you came back to the UK. So then going over to visit a country which culturally, I presume, you feel connected with or not connected with. What was that aspect like?
A bit of both, and I think that's why when I wrote my book, I knew that I was bringing something to, the book market that I hadn't really seen before, because most books about India weren't written about, at least travel books about India weren't written by anybody Indian. They were sort of largely written by posh white men who'd sort of strode into the country with this unchecked privilege, just writing about the natives. And I obviously didn't approach it from that angle, because I'm British born, but I'm Indian. And so cultural nuances didn't escape me. I could speak, enough Hindi to get by. I could read and write Hindi, which I remembered from when I was a kid, which really helped with, train signs and station posts and things. And also when people looked at me, they knew this is an Indian girl, but at the same time, they knew that I wasn't quite Indian because of the way that I dressed, or my accent, and they could see that I had certain, my backpack and my trainers and things weren't quite typical. But it made me a curiosity for them in a good way people would always come and sidle up to me and say, "Where are you from? What are you doing? What on earth are you doing traveling on all these trains?" Because you don't often see young women with giant caramel backpacks and, little dictaphones and notebooks traveling on trains at night by themselves. And I think it gave me a really lovely insight into the country, because I already had enough knowledge to know what, cultural specifics there are in food and mindset and mannerisms and gestures and the way people think, and, they have the sort of cultural nuances and family, the way people will warm to you. They come to you because they want to help, they want to know what you're doing, and it's never out of malice or, any kind of hostility. They're just curious and want to know who you are and what you're doing and get to know you. Which can be quite off-putting to some people. And I know that other accounts of traveling in India have said how difficult it is to be alone, and people always come and harass you or approach you. And I never really felt like that at all. But at the same time, I was able to straddle two mindsets, I guess. So I had that sort of insider but also outsider approach. So I was able to look at India in a different light from most travel writers. And I guess the main thing that I was really keen to do with my book was to remove all that sort of exoticism that you get in a lot of travel writing about India, about the sort of spices and the smells and the colours and the weddings and all that sort of cows in the road and the typical tropes. Because, when you're there for a couple of weeks, you just don't even notice those things anymore. And it's so everyday and so pedestrian that you realize that there is just so much more beneath that superficial surface. And that was so much more interesting to me, was to actually talk to all these people and chat to Indian people and find out about how they travel in India. What for them is tourism in India? Where do they eat? Where do they, go on holiday and that sort of stuff? And so it was a really nice way for me to approach traveling in India, I think. And I certainly came away learning so much about it, to the degree that I had really lovely messages from Indian readers later saying, "You've traveled to so many bits of our country that we've never seen before, and opened it up for us to be able to holiday on our doorsteps in a way that we never thought we'd be able to." Yeah. So it was a lovely trip.
I'd love you to share, and this will be a really difficult question because I know that there will be so many memories, but I'd love you to share maybe just one of those magical moments when you're at home and you have a quiet moment, it just suddenly pops in your head and it makes you smile and just brings joy to your life. What was one of those moments from that trip?
Do you know, I can literally picture it right now. There was, you'd have to read the book to get all the ins and outs of what happened. But my photographer and I had sort of went back and forth quite a lot with arguments and whatnot, because in a nutshell, he was what he referred to as a militant, devout atheist, which is fine, but it's quite difficult to travel with somebody like that in a country like India, which has got so many different religions. Almost every religion of the world you'll find in India, and it got a bit tiring after a while. So I took myself off for a few weeks, and it was difficult because I didn't know what to expect as a single woman traveling by myself, into very, very small villages and traveling on night trains with absolutely no one else around in compartments. But there was one moment where I was traveling in Karnataka, in a really beautiful, beautiful place called Hampi. And we'd climbed up the steps to, oh gosh, it must have taken about half an hour to get to the top. There's an absolutely beautiful statue up there, which is, it's in Shravanabela Gola. And it's the view when you reach the top is phenomenal. You stand right at the top of this hill, and all you see is what looks like just a very, very, very flat patchwork quilt of fields and temples and forests. And I got to the very top of that. It was a warm day, and I climbed up there and had my music on. And I remember specifically it was Candy Statton's song, the one which says, "Sometimes I feel like throwing my hands up in the air."
Yeah.
And I got to the top and I thought, you've done this. You've got here. You flew out here. You got on those trains. You've done about 60 odd journeys. You survived it. You've been a bit ill. You've been a bit depressed. You've been a bit sad. You've been lonely. But you made it, and you've done it without anybody else here. And I just remember feeling so exhilarated by that view and thinking, there's nothing else that can come at me that I can't handle. And it made me realize how much I got out of traveling by myself and being on my own. And it felt really empowering being one of the only women there at the top of this hill with people just standing around. And I remember just standing with my hands on my hips thinking, come on then, what else can we do? And it was just a lovely feeling. And it was the first time I'd ever really traveled alone for such a long period of time. And I always remember that now whenever I feel a bit nervous about something or a bit apprehensive about taking on some big piece of work that I'm not sure I'll be able to do. That always comes to mind again. And also for anyone who's never been to that part of India, it's absolutely spectacular. It's very, very little visited. There's few tourists there, but mainly Indian tourism is big there, but few international travelers. And I think it's because it's just a little nook of the country that just for some reason hasn't been written about all that much. But the temples down there are stunning, and I would absolutely recommend anybody go and visit them.
Oh my God, it sounds so idyllic and beautiful. And I love like these magic moments, which are so sometimes so powerful when you can just reflect back and be like, yeah, that's the moment. And then you can relive it and you're just like, yeah, you know what? I can take on anything because I did that. I did that
Yeah.
thing. I'd love to know a little bit more about your writing process. I mean, so you were going out there with with the view to writing a book about your
Yes.
experience of riding on the trains. Like, what is your process? How do you make notes? If you could share a little bit more about that, I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah, of course. I had the old classic leather-bound diary with those lovely thick parchment pages, but I didn't really write very much in it every day. I would sort of have a week or two of having a really great time and then think, oh, I haven't written anything in my diary. I'm not going to remember it all. And I'd sit down for sort of 2 hours and write reams and reams of detail and then forget again for another week or two. And when I came back, it was absolutely full. But oddly enough, that wasn't really the detail that went into the book. It was very useful to remember how I felt at the time because it was usually my emotions that I documented and how I felt about a place. And that was really useful because when I came to write, I could always remember what things looked like or smelt like or what the food was because I collected all the menus in really good places like little dabas where you get small roadside treats. I would photograph them and I would remember exactly what the food was and what it tasted like and the name of the vendor and the street it was on, but I couldn't always remember how I felt on that day or for what reason, and that's what was useful. But the other little bits and pieces I collected were I always have a small notepad in my pocket wherever I am, so that if I am chatting to someone and I think I really need to remember that they've got a tiny bit of spinach in their teeth, or the green tea that they're holding smells really strong of jasmine, or they've got, it's a monk I'm chatting to in Tibet who's wearing a pair of Nike trainers. I need to remember those tiny things. I can then nip off to the loo and I would just take out a little pencil and just write down a couple of lines about them that, that really specific detail that just brings somebody to life later when you come back to read about it. And I wanted readers to be able to just to see and to smell and to hear the same things that I did at that time so that they could really feel like they were sitting there and to feel like they were on that journey with me and just bring it alive. So I have a combination of things. I have photographs, I have, photos of road signs and menus, and I have pictures, I have diaries, I've got all sorts. And I almost lay them out like a jigsaw when I start to write. And I put the whole lot down into a document and then just move it around. And I have what I call a paste board where I dump things that I know I'm going to want to use at some point, and then I keep looking back at it every other day to see if there's anything in there that will fit my chapters until eventually the whole pasteboard is cleared and I've sort of shuffled it all out among the pages. So I don't know whether that's a very, I guess everyone has their own unique way of documenting things, but for me that's definitely the most useful way of doing things.
Yeah, I love that. I when I was writing my dissertation, I had some. I didn't know what it was called, but I definitely had like a document where I'd
Yeah.
write stuff. I think, oh, that's so good, but it just doesn't fit anywhere. And so,
Doesn't fit, yeah.
yeah. So when you're at home, are you quite sort of regimented with your writing? Are you quite set times? So every morning you wake up and write for 2 hours. How do you fit writing into your life? You've got I think you've got two little girls. Is that right? Your two
Oh,
children?
wow, yes. So when I did the India book, I it was just me. I was single when I came back, and I spent 11 months just sitting at a desk alone writing the book. I did nothing else. I sort of freelanced in between a little bit for my old job, but I just wrote the book. I just got up in the morning, I started to write after breakfast, and I just wrote as much as I could until I didn't feel like what I was doing was any good. And I would often write at 10, 11 at night because I find nighttime one of the easiest times to write because there's absolutely no distraction. No one's on Twitter, very few people on Facebook. The first book I wrote in 2011 when everyone was posting on Facebook all day long and pictures were coming up and people were being tagged, and I would have to just switch off Wi-Fi and I would write at nighttime, and it was a really peaceful time. And I would often get an hour and a half at night where I'd get some of the best detail out. And I also I keep a notebook next to my bed. So if I was just sitting in bed reading or, watching Netflix and something would suddenly crop up, I would write it down straight away so that I wouldn't forget. And occasionally I actually got up, came back into the living room and started writing because I think I know exactly what it is I want to say now. And if I don't put it down, I'll probably forget it. So again, I don't have a very, at least then I didn't have a very disciplined way of writing. I just kept writing. And I also edit as I go along. I think because I trained as a sub-editor when I did my journalism course, and I worked as a sub-editor for quite a long time, I like to edit as I go along. And every time I open up my chapter in the morning, I would immediately edit everything I'd done and get it into a shape that would just look pleasing to me. And then I'd carry on writing the rest of it. So I do tidy and edit constantly. But when I did my second book, I had a very different setup because I was about 8 months pregnant when I started writing the book. I knew that I had to get my deadline was sort of a year later. And I knew that once I had this baby, there was probably no chance in hell of getting any writing done. So I did the biggest chunks of the second book while I was still pregnant. And I remember writing about 15,000 words before she arrived. But then when she came, I gave myself 6 weeks off of sort of self-imposed maternity leave. And then I just wrote. I don't actually know in hindsight how I did it because I wrote for 9 months. So she was 9 months old when I submitted the manuscript of 110,000 words. And I had sort of 2 or 3 hours of sleep a night with this newborn. And I would neck a mug of coffee in the morning. I stayed with my parents for a few months and I would hand her over to my mum and just sit in the office and lock the door. And my mum would keep reappearing every 2 hours saying, I think she's hungry. And I'd feed her on my lap and I'd write. And then I'd hand her back to my mum. And then I'd come down for lunch, feed her again, and then go back to my office and work. And this went on until I just got it done. I didn't have a choice at that point. When she slept, I had a monitor on my desk so I could see whether she was awake or not. And I just wrote and wrote when she was sleeping because you just don't have a choice otherwise. I haven't done a book since they were both, since the second baby came, but I am planning another. So at least they're both sleeping through now. So I think, it will be a little bit easier. But otherwise, I think even without them here, I would just keep writing because I don't know whether I'm in a minority, but I feel my happiest when I'm writing. I love it. I really enjoy the process. And I feel really at home and in my element when I start to write. And I just really enjoy the paragraphs that I'm writing and I can feel it coming and it looks right to me. And I feel really at home doing it. I enjoy the process, which I think you have to if you're going to spend most of your life doing it.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Totally. It's not, sometimes it's not about the end result. It's about enjoying the journey and the process. Yeah. And I'd love to talk to you about your second book you wrote, Around the World in 80 Trains, a 45,000 mile adventure. And I'd love to go back to maybe just the start, the dream, how the idea evolved. Obviously, you'd had this incredible experience of riding trains around India, and then you decided to take it up a notch and go for the world. Yeah. How did you even plan that adventure?
I remember having the conversation with my agent about it because he said, come on, you haven't done another book and you should. And if you don't do another one soon, someone else will take the format and go and do it and you'll be cross. And I knew he was right, but we couldn't really come up with something that was similar to the India trip that would be feasible because I wanted to do trains again in another country. But there was just not another one where I could have done the same thing. And come up with the same result. I think China was the first option, but I don't speak either language. And I knew that I just wouldn't be able to talk to people, get those stories, eavesdrop, do all those things you have to do on trains to bring it to life. So I had to rule that out. And then we thought about South America. And I, again, for the same reason, language was an issue. So, India was great that way because I mean, not everybody, but most people speak English and I could get by fine. And in the end, I just thought, I think I'll just do the world and figure out how far I can get from London without flying too much, because that's not really the point of the book. So I just bought a huge map from Stanford's travel bookshop and I pinned it to the wall and I looked up all these places that I'd always wanted to visit. And it was like a bucket list dream. I stood there with pins and just thought, if you could go anywhere, where would you go? And I put a pin in Tibet, put one in North Korea, I put one in Vancouver's Rocky Mountains, and it just went on like that. Tokyo, Kyoto, Beijing, the Great Wall of China. And I just kept peppering the whole map. And then I took out a whole load of train timetables and books about train travel and got string and I tied it from one pin to the next to see how far I could get from London overland before I would have to fly. And I could get all the way to Singapore, which amazed me. I had no idea it was even possible to go overland all the way. And the only issue was that after that, it was difficult because Cambodia doesn't have any trains. So I could get all the way from London to Singapore. And then from there, I had to try and figure out a few connecting journeys. And the issue that came in Asia was that Cambodia doesn't have any trains at all. At least it didn't then. They've now resurrected one of the routes. But I had to take a couple of buses across Cambodia and then carry on the journey to Thailand and down to Malaysia and around Southeast Asia. And the only irritant was having to fly across to Japan and then Japan to Canada. But after that, I managed to get from Vancouver to Toronto, Toronto down to New York, and all around the US. So it was a sort of, I guess it literally went literally round the world, because I couldn't do South America because it would have meant flying. I couldn't do Africa at the time because of the Ebola virus. And also the trains there aren't connected in a way that they are in other countries. So I would have been stopping and starting all the time and taking buses in between. And that really wasn't what I wanted for a book that was about train travel. So I literally just did the string tying and I figured out how long I would need in each city and how soon I could get out in terms of visas, because I had 90-day entries for most of them. And it was quite a risky process, I think, because once I realized that I could travel from, I think it was April to December, and make sure that the different countries I traveled in, it wasn't either extremely cold or extremely hot, I then bought my visas almost a week before I left. So it was quite precarious and, stop and start. But I managed to get them all with about 7 days spare to make sure I had enough of a 90-day window, and then just set off. And just a lot of it was planned in advance in terms of the larger train journey. So the Trans-Mongolian Express, my Amtrak pass in the US, I got the Japanese rail pass for 3 weeks. I had I think it was a European rail pass, and then a couple of other larger journeys, which are quite popular. So I wanted to book them in advance. But then it was relatively easy to sew in all the other journeys that connected. And with most train journeys, there would be sort of 2 or 3 options every couple of hours. So even if I missed something, I could always turn up at the station, just rearrange the ticket usually for no fee, and hop on again. And it was quite easy to do. And I think I only missed one train in Madrid, and there was another one an hour later. So it never really hindered my journey. The other thing I did was make sure that I had little sort of, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of barriers on either side. So that if I had 3 days in a city and I needed, a week to get somewhere else, I'd always sort of cushion it with a couple of days on either side, just to factor in the potential for delays and cancellations, or even illness, which hits you when you least want it. But I think that's what made the book and the journey really fun, that it wasn't regimented. It wasn't here's my timetable from April to December, and that's rigid, and that's how it's going to be. Because also nobody wants to read about that sort of travel. No one wants to know that you got up on time, you missed your train. So you got up on time, you didn't miss your train, you traveled from A to B, and when you got there, it was really lovely and fun, and the end. People want to know when you went wrong, when you fought with a ticket inspector, when you got a fine, when you didn't make it to your train by a few seconds, that you overslept, all the things that everybody does. And for me, it had to be a real journey. It had to be an honest journey where I arrived in a city and thought, do you know what? I'm not having that great a time here. I'm going to leave early. Or on the contrary, arrived somewhere and thought, this is one of the most incredible places I've ever visited and I can't bear to leave now. So I'd stay an extra few days. And that was really how the book worked itself out. And in the end, when it came to writing it up, it was so much more fun to relive all those mishaps and, delays and cancellations, that made the book what it was, I think.
Yeah. What are the realities of train travel, like especially on the longer journeys, maybe like the overnight journeys? What's the day-to-day life like on the trains?
Do you know it? So I could answer that question for China and then give you a completely different answer for, say, Spain or Portugal. Mm, for me, I absolutely love the trains where it's like an overnight camping trip, except without the rain and the grass in your tea and that sort of thing. It's so much fun to get on board and know that you've got 27 hours ahead of you and it's 7 o'clock at night and there's a really big dining car and you can smell the noodles that are being flash fried in a wok, and you get your berth, you get handed a little card by the inspector who'll take it back off you when you get off, and you get your duvets, you get your pillows, you meet a couple of other people in there, and everyone's wearing these sort of furry flip-flops and sliders. And then you all go off to the dining car, you order off a really fun menu, have a couple of beers, and then retire to your compartment. And people will either read or snooze or chat to each other or just watch hilarious Chinese dramas on gold iPhones really loudly so that no one can sleep, or just people were sitting watching Game of Thrones. It was so fun. It felt like a big kind of dormitory most of the time, with all ages of people. I remember one journey, in China, actually. It was from Beijing all the way south to Nanning. We were traveling with a really lovely student who was on his way home after a year, I think, to go and see his mum. We were really lucky that he spoke English because not many people do in China. And he explained everything to us. And the two elderly women sitting on the bottom two berths were easily in their 80s. And they were so sweet and obviously did not speak a word of English, but he explained to them what we were doing and where we were from. And they shared all their mantou buns with us, which are almost like sugary cupcakes. And they were so sweet. And they gave us their tea and they told us very firmly what not to order in the dining car and what to have for breakfast. And the whole thing is it's such a community that you have on board where it's not seen as the wrong thing to just sidle up to someone and start playing cards with them and their friends, or to, swap books, or just hand over a paperback, or share your packets of crisps and biscuits and things. And it's just there's such a kind of warmth and familial feeling of this kind of train travel. And it's something that I didn't see in Europe very much, because the overnight train journeys they're quite kind of sort of cut and dry. You get on board, you all just go into your compartments, you shut the door, you go to bed, and then you get up in the morning and no one really talks to anybody. And it all felt very, very dry and nothing happened really, I think. And that's why I think a few people said to me, oh, your European chapter was very short and not very much happened. And I said, well, that's just the reality of it. There wasn't much conversation. There wasn't much adventure. There wasn't that sort of noise and clamour and smoke and fights and arguments and the sort of fun that you just want out of a really big long train journey. And I think that's why there's always so much to write about them, and that's why I love train travel so much, because as a travel writer you want stories, you want be able to look out of a window and just watch the scenery go by like a slideshow. And at one point you can be going past mountains rising out of water, and then a few hours later you're going past double humped camels and Mongolian gears, and there's no other form of transport that gives you that just gives you so much of a sort of sensory overload and such an idea of where you are all the time. I think that's the other thing about train travel, is that I always have a sense of space and I have a sense of where I am and how long I've been on board. Whereas when I'm flying, I'm wedged between usually two people I don't really want to be wedged between. And there's nothing but this grubby little oval window. And if you're lucky, you can see a smattering of, a network of lights that could be some city or the other. You have no idea until you land. But when you're on a train, you always have a sense of where you are. There's always a little village that pops up, or a lake, or a school, or a town, or just something that makes you think, that's where we are on this stage of my journey. And you know how far you've come, and you know how far you've got left. And I love that about trains. I think that's why I'm so addicted to them, and can't imagine writing very much that doesn't involve train journeys.
Yeah. Reflecting back, you've been on so many incredible train journeys throughout the world. And which is the train journey that you want to do again, or, the one that you want to go back and revisit? Which was the one that just blew your mind? You was like, this is just so epic and amazing and incredible.
I think that would be the Qinghai Railway to Tibet from Beijing. We actually took it from Shanghai, but it was the most spectacular train journey I've ever been on. It was 56 hours in total from Shanghai to Xining, from Xining to Lhasa. And it was the scenery outside the window that nothing leaves me breathless. Very little literally leaves me breathless, but this did, because of the altitude. It's about 5,100 meters. But we fell asleep in Xining and woke up in the morning, probably about 8 o'clock in the morning, and pulled up. I just remember we had a blackout blind, pulled up the blackout blind, and this blaze of yellow light just came searing into the compartment, and it looked like a Mark Rothko painting. It had just this plateau was just creamy yellow, big slab across the bottom of the window, and then this extraordinary electric blue sky as a big half slab across the top. And we were up in the Qinghai Plateau at that point, and I just sat at the window completely speechless for about 7 or 8 minutes. And Jeremy was obviously Jeremy, my now husband, was traveling with me at the time. I remember him sitting opposite me and just gawping out of the window. And my friend Mark, who came with us for the last 3 chapters of the book, who's a photographer, we didn't say anything. He just took out his camera and he just kept clicking and just dropping his camera and staring. And I find it so difficult to describe it to people, because it was the kind of sky I've never seen before and probably will never see again. This extraordinary yellow plateau that just went on for miles and miles and miles to the horizon. And there were little, Tibetan prayer flags every so often, and yaks, these really raggedy looking yaks, all matted and dreadlocked. And then suddenly lakes would appear, like silver molten. You sort of think, have I just seen that, or was it a mirage? And then it would disappear. And then suddenly what looked like turquoise sea would suddenly just come gushing towards you right up to the track. And then as fast as it came, it would disappear. And it was all bright and sunny. And within a couple of hours, the train then curled up towards the Kunlun Mountains and the Tangula Pass, which is actually the highest point in the world. And you could just see the mountains closing in on you. They were just this jagged blue ice, and they cast a shadow into the train and it went dark. And we were winding around them on permafrost, actually, which I didn't realize at the time. And then we'd sail out from the back of them and down into the Lhasa Valley. And we arrived into the station, which was like something out. It was a sort of space age looking station, which you absolutely don't expect at the end of this journey, full of Chinese military, which was a very, very sad ending to the journey. But it was the most spectacular trip. And if I could ever go back and do that one again, I absolutely would. And when we left, I mean, the great thing was we got to do that journey again, but backwards. And so it was at nighttime. And when I remember the moon being the biggest I think I've ever seen it, it was almost rolling alongside us along the ground, and it was lighting up the origins of the Yangtze River, which in the black of night just looked like silver thread everywhere. And we were just speechless. We all just sat staring at the window for a good hour, because we just were trying desperately to just take in as much as we could, because we all knew that if we ever were allowed back into Tibet, it would be years and years and years from now. So it was it's almost seared onto my brain, that image. So if anyone is ever thinking of a big journey to do, I would absolutely recommend that one, because you will never forget it.
Yeah. How easy was it coming home after your travels, after spending so much time traveling on trains around the world, and then coming back to normal life is so. Sometimes in adventure, I've talked about with adventurers like the adventure blues. Do you get like the travel blues when you come back, or are you ready for a bit of normality?
Do you know, after 7 months, I was so ready to come home. It was an amazing journey, but I think you do reach a point where you think, I could really do with a bacon sandwich, cup of tea, and my slippers, and I'm tired of living out of a bag that's got a really strange smell now that just won't go away, and rotating six of the same t-shirts for 7 months, and literally having nothing but lip balm and a bit of concealer and nothing else. And I had reached the end of it. It was a wonderful journey. It really was. But I think because we saved it in terms of it was difficult with planning, but the end of the journey was some of the most difficult bit. And 2 months before we finished, we were in North Korea for 10 days. And that was a really, really arduous bit of the trip, not just physically, but it was really taxing and mentally quite challenging because you're in North Korea, you don't know what you're seeing, you don't know what you're being told, you keep hearing all kinds of stories from the guides that you're walking around with, and you want to process this by talking to other people about it and saying, well, what is this, and what am I looking at, and why are you showing me these things? But you can't, and you have to bottle it all up. And the other people on our tour trip didn't know I was a journalist. So I was nervous all the time that if I ever got found out, they might get into trouble. And I just felt tense the whole time, but at the same time, trying to keep aware and absorb everything that was going on. And then when we came back into Beijing, we were both really sick. And of course, that doesn't help anyone when you're traveling. And we spent about 10 days really unwell, but you have to keep going. And so we carried on through China, went up to Tibet, came back from Tibet, went on through Xinjiang province, which was also a very difficult place to travel in because of so much Chinese military presence, and three of us wandering around trying to look like tourists while talking to people and making notes and photographing things. And then crossing over into Kazakhstan, from Kazakhstan into Russia. And this was all in November, December, and the temperature was about -14. And it was cold. It was cold. It was really tiring. And it was difficult at that point. We'd really gone through the motions, and it was knowing that home was just a couple of weeks away just kept us going. And I think also having Mark joined us towards the end of that trip, he spent the last 6 weeks with us, and we really needed that. And we could really feel that this really energetic, bouncy person who was fresh from work just came out and said, come on, guys, get yourselves together. We've got 6 weeks together, make this good. And we really needed that. We were really buoyed by having him there, and it helped so much. But to come back we felt like we came back on a high. There wasn't that feeling of, God, I can't wait to get out of here at all. It was an amazing sense of achievement I remember the train pulling into Victoria. It was come back on the Orient Express, and I got on a Belmont Pullman train from Kent. And as we drew into Victoria, I thought, I can't believe we're actually on train. We're on a train coming back into London after having just, a couple of weeks ago been in China, and we haven't been on a plane. This is incredible to think this is actually happening. And it was a real sense of, again, it was that feeling of having climbed that mountain and hearing that music again, thinking we did it. We did 7 months of this. And that odd feeling when we came into Victoria and we could see commuters everywhere just thundering down the stairs and shoving newspapers into the recycling bin, the Evening Standard, and pigeons overhead, and Burger King, and just coming out hearing the rumble of that black taxi and thinking, I'm going to get in a taxi home now, and I'm going to be home in about 2 hours, and this is just an amazing feeling. And it was lovely. It was really lovely. But yeah, I appreciated being home again. I really did. I appreciated all those little things that we take for granted. And I was very grateful to come back to them.
Yeah, what a way to end. The Orient Express into London. I mean, oh, that sounds incredible. Are you able to share more about your third book? I mean, I know it might be on hold at the moment with COVID and everything else that's happening on, but have you got a plan or an idea, or is it all sort of under wraps?
It's I'm literally waiting to hear back from
Oh.
my publisher. It is going to be trains. Do you know what I can tell you? Because I'm going to be positive and hope that it's going to come off. I'm going to do another book, but it's going to be on night trains. It's going to be on the resurgence of night trains because there's been so much in the last year of European trains coming back. They'd phased out a lot of routes, but just a few weeks ago, I think it's Germany, Austria, and France and Spain, I think, who've agreed to resurrect some night services together because people want them. Climate change is a massive, massive problem, and we can't pretend that it's not anymore. And good old Greta Thunberg has, fired everyone with the understanding that we have to be really conscious about how we travel now. Sustainable travel is really important. I don't like flying, just generally, I don't enjoy the whole process, but I certainly don't like knowing that I'm contributing to, the horrors of climate change. And night trains, for all those reasons that I mentioned before, they're so much fun. They're incredible fun. Slow travel is something that I think a lot of people are considering more and more now, especially given that we've not been able to travel for the last year. I think people are going to be really mindful about what they do next and how they're going to change the manner in which we travel, how we affect tourism, how we affect, everything that we do, really. Everything that we do is going to change. I think everyone's going to start looking at the types of holidays that they do. And trains are getting more and more popular with people. And not just with regards to, climate change and, having fun with slow travel, but also just with nervousness about the coronavirus and social distancing things. I think with planes, it's very hard to socially distance on board. And I mean, you almost can't. But with trains, most trains around Europe can legitimately run at 50% capacity and can justify putting on a service. So if they can space out people and give people private compartments where they don't need to wear masks with the door shut and they can have the windows open, they can travel with their families, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more people taking to trains and night trains when they know that it might just keep them that little bit safer. So that's my plan. And it's going to be quite a lot of Europe and a few of the countries that I didn't get to with my last book. So fingers crossed. I should know in a few days whether that's going to come off or not. But yeah, obviously the travel is going to have to be on hold for a little while. I hope that I can do some of the European travels by the end of the year, and then next year do the rest of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my fingers crossed at the moment.
Thank you.
But I think it is, like, even when you do look at budget flights now as well, like, they're not, it's actually very stressful. And even just, the airport, the security.
Oh, it's horrible.
Yeah, going through everything. And also, especially with certain companies, it's like the size bags you can take.
Yeah.
And you know you're going to get screwed over at some point on and printing out
funny,
tickets.
That was actually one of the things that I discussed at length when I sort of submitted my proposal. I said, you go to airports, you have to leave really early to get there. You've got to, you get poked, prodded, scanned, your liquids taken off you. You have to take off your shoes, unbuckle your belt, collapse your buggy, you forget things. It's, just so fiddly all the time. And then especially with budget flights, you think it's a budget flight, and then you end up saying, I'd like a bigger bag. I'd like to check in my bag. I'd like to, board first. I'd like to have another bag for my buggy. Oh, now I've ended up spending as much as a normal BA flight. And the hidden costs are just huge. Whereas when you get a train ticket, that's your cost. That's your train ticket. You can take as many bags as you'd like. You can have as much liquid as you want. No one's going to poke you and prod you. No one's going to ask you to take your shoes off and go through a scanner. And it's just so much more, I hate saying this word, but a bit more civilized and so fun. It's just such an easy, straightforward process. And of course, when you cross borders, you have to have your bags sort of patted down and things. But it was never a painful process to have to go through, and it just made things so much more relaxed. It was just such a much more straightforward, pleasant experience all around. And I hope more people will give train travel a go because it really is fun. It really is great fun.
Yeah, I think there is going to have to be big changes. So it's going to be really interesting to see what does happen. And obviously, the more people that use trains, the more options that will become available. It's going to be fascinating. But Monisha, where's the best place for people to find more information about you, to buy your books, to follow your journeys online? Where should they follow you?
They can have a look at monisharajesh.com, which has got info about my books. And I'm on Twitter, Monisha Rajesh, quite easy to find, and Instagram. And if people do want to buy my books, I would absolutely beg you to get them from an independent bookshop if you can. Lovely Queen's Park Books, which is my local bookshop, have been amazing through lockdown. And they have got a big stack of both my books, all signed. So if you do want a signed copy, you can call them up and they will post one out to you. And the staff are really lovely and they would really appreciate it coming from there.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll make sure that I put all of your links to your social media and also to Queen's Park Books.
Queen's Park Books, yes.
Queen's Park Books, yeah, absolutely. Let's support the independent retailers out there and get your signed copies books. What am I saying? Get the signed copies of your books from them. I will make sure that I share all of the links. But Monisha, thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more about your passion for trains and travel. It's been amazing to speak with you.
Thank you so much.
Hey tribe, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Monisha. What an absolute inspiration. I have been missing travel so much. So listening to Monisha share more about her journeys and experiences has just given me so much happiness and so much joy. And I'm sure it's the same for you as well. My name is Sarah Williams. I'm the host of the Tough Girl podcast and the founder of Tough Girl Challenges. So thank you so much for tuning in. You can find more information about everything that we've talked about today in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go and check it out. New episodes of the Tough Girl podcast go live on a Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. I'm just going to share a few of the details about some of our future episodes that we have coming out in the coming weeks. So on the 18th of February, we're going to be speaking with Emma Lucy Cole, who's going to be sharing more about the joys and challenges of being a solo woman researcher, explorer and biker. She's going to be sharing more about spending 2 years with a Bedouin tribe in Sinai. On the 23rd of February, Lee View is going to be coming on the Tough Girl podcast and sharing more about her experiences of paddling the Mississippi River, 2,300 plus miles, and more about her team winning first place in the Women's Voyager division in the Yukon River Quest, a journey of 444 miles, which was done in 53 hours. On the 25th of February, we've got Helen Mort, who is a poet and author who wrote the book Never Leave the Dog Behind, who explores the relationship between people, dogs and the great outdoors. So well worth tuning into. Some incredible episodes, amazing stories which will motivate and inspire you. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad free, and that's thanks to the patrons who support the Tough Girl podcast. There's currently 267 individuals around the world who are supporting the mission to increase the amount of female role models in the media. A massive thank you to Rebecca Sardar, Helen Oakes, Gina Evans and Helen Lane for signing up as a patron. You can sign up in sterling, US dollars and euros. There's the options to do a monthly subscription, or you can sign up for an annual subscription where you also get a 10% discount. You can go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast to find out more. Many thanks again for your support and your encouragement, and I hope you're enjoying listening to the Tough Girl Podcast. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.